The clinking of crystal against crystal, the murmur of polite conversation, the soft strains of a string quartet. It was the symphony of a successful life, a life I had meticulously orchestrated. I stood amidst the swirling crowd of our annual charity gala, a glass of champagne swirling idly in my hand, my gaze fixed on my wife, Isabella. She was a vision in crimson, the vibrant color a stark contrast to the cool detachment that had settled within me. She laughed, a melodic sound that once filled me with warmth, now a hollow echo in the chambers of my heart. She was surrounded by her usual coterie, the ever-present circle of friends and acquaintances who orbited her like moths to a flame. I watched them, their smiles, their easy camaraderie, and a bitter taste rose in my throat. Just a week ago, this scene would have filled me with a sense of pride, a quiet satisfaction at the life we had built together. Now it felt like a stage production, a carefully constructed illusion about to be shattered. An anonymous message, a digital dagger, had pierced the carefully constructed facade of our happiness. It wasn't a rambling accusation or a jealous whisper. It was a precise, detailed account of Isabella's infidelities. Names, dates, locations, a comprehensive catalog of betrayals that stretched back further than I cared to calculate. The initial shock had been a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. Then came the disbelief, the desperate hope that it was some cruel mistake, some malicious fabrication. But as I delved deeper into the information, the cold, hard truth settled upon me like a shroud. The woman I loved, the woman I had sworn to cherish, had been weaving a tapestry of deceit, and I, the fool, had been blind to it all. The champagne in my hand felt suddenly heavy, the bubbles mocking my naivete. I took a slow sip, the taste turning to ash in my mouth. My gaze remained fixed on Isabella, on the way her head tilted when she laughed, the subtle touch of her hand on a man's arm. Each gesture, once so familiar, now felt like a carefully rehearsed performance, a calculated manipulation. The warmth I once felt for her had curdled into something cold and hard, a glacial fury that simmered beneath the surface of my composure. I would not lash out. I would not create a scene. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing my pain. Instead, I would become a silent observer, a meticulous chronicler of her betrayals, and I would plan. I would plan with the same precision and dedication that I had used to build my business empire. I would dismantle her world, piece by piece, just as she had dismantled my trust. The music swelled, the dancers twirled, and the laughter echoed through the ballroom. But in the quiet corners of my mind, a storm was brewing. The anonymous message wasn't just a collection of whispers and rumors. It was a meticulously compiled dossier. It was as if someone had been meticulously documenting Isabella's transgressions, waiting for the opportune moment to unleash the information. And that moment had arrived, landing in my inbox with the force of a physical blow. The details were staggering in their precision. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a chronicle of stolen moments, whispered conversations, clandestine meetings, photographs, discreetly taken, confirmed the whispered allegations, each image a shard of glass piercing the already fragile remnants of my trust. There were dates, times, locations, a comprehensive map of Isabella's infidelity, a roadmap of her betrayal. The men, they were a cross-section of our social circle. Some were mere acquaintances, men I barely knew, their presence in Isabella's life easily dismissed as casual interactions. Others, however, were closer, men I had considered friends, confidants, men who had shared dinners at our home, celebrated holidays with our family, men I had trusted implicitly. The realization that these men, these supposed friends, had been complicit in Isabella's deception was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was the sheer audacity of it, the way they had woven themselves into the fabric of our lives while simultaneously undermining it. The thought of their laughter, their handshakes, their casual conversations, now felt like a grotesque mockery. I felt a wave of nausea, a physical revulsion at the thought of their presence in my home, their proximity to my wife. The dossier was more than just evidence. It was a testament to my own blindness, my own naivete. How could I have been so oblivious? How could I have failed to see the signs, the subtle shifts in Isabella's behavior, the moments of unexplained absence, the air of secrecy that had gradually crept into our lives? The answer, I knew, was that I had been too trusting, too willing to believe in the illusion of our happiness. I had been so focused on building my business, on achieving success, that I had neglected the most important thing, the health of my own marriage. I had been so busy constructing the facade of a perfect life that I had failed to notice the cracks in the foundation. Now, those cracks were widening, threatening to shatter everything I had built. The dossier sat on my desk, a stark reminder of my humiliation. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the images, the words, the weight of the betrayal. But it was no use. The information had burrowed into my mind, poisoning my thoughts, fueling a rage that simmered just below the surface. I would not let this go unpunished. I would not allow Isabella and her accomplices to get away with their deception. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my trust for gullibility. They would soon learn the true extent of their mistake. The initial shock and rage had given way to a chilling calm. I was a man of action, a strategist. I wouldn't succumb to the raw emotion that threatened to consume me. Instead, I would channel it, harness it, and use it to fuel my plan. My first step was observation. I became a shadow, a silent observer of Isabella's life. I watched her routines, her interactions, her carefully constructed facade. I studied her like a specimen under a microscope, noting every detail, every nuance. I saw the way her eyes lit up when she received a certain phone call, the way her smile faltered when I entered the room, the way she subtly adjusted her schedule to accommodate her clandestine meetings. I listened to her conversations, her carefully crafted lies, her practiced excuses. I observed her interactions with our friends, the subtle signals, the stolen glances, the hushed whispers that betrayed their complicity. The more I observed, the more I realized the extent of her deception. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents. It was a pattern of behavior, a carefully orchestrated web of lies that she had woven around me. I began to see her in a new light, a stranger masquerading as my wife. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved, had vanished, replaced by a master manipulator, a skilled deceiver. The realization was both painful and liberating. Painful because it shattered the illusion of our happiness. Liberating because it freed me from the shackles of my own naivete. I was no longer the trusting husband, blind to his wife's infidelity. I was the observer, the detective, the one who saw through the lies and exposed the truth. My observations extended beyond Isabella. I began to study the men involved, their habits, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. I learned their schedules, their routines, their secrets. I gathered information, compiling a mental dossier on each of them, building a case against them, just as they had built a case against me. I was no longer the victim. I was the predator, patiently stalking my prey, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The anger still simmered within me, but it was a controlled burn, a slow, steady flame that fueled my determination. I would not rest until justice was served, until Isabella and her accomplices paid the price for their betrayal. The game had begun, and I was playing to win. My plan was not about a single act of revenge, a grand gesture of retribution. It was about precision, about dismantling their lives with the same meticulous care that they had used to dismantle mine. I would start small, with the weakest link, the easiest target. His name was Mark, a junior associate at a rival firm. He was young, ambitious, and clearly infatuated with Isabella. He was also, I discovered, deeply in debt, his finances stretched thin by his attempts to maintain a lifestyle beyond his means. I saw an opportunity. I engineered a business deal, a seemingly lucrative opportunity that would appeal to his ambition and his desperation. I dangled the bait and he took it hook, line, and sinker. The deal, of course, was a carefully constructed illusion. I manipulated the numbers, created false promises, and lured him into a trap of his own making. When the time was right, I pulled the rug out from under him, exposing the flaws in the deal, the hidden risks, the inevitable losses. The consequences were swift and devastating. Mark lost his job, his reputation, and his financial security. He was left with nothing but a mountain of debt and a shattered ego. It was a small victory, a minor pawn sacrificed in a larger game. But it was a satisfying one nonetheless. I watched from the sidelines as Mark's world crumbled, a sense of cold satisfaction settling within me. It was a taste of what was to come, a preview of the fate that awaited Isabella and the rest of her accomplices. I was not a cruel man, but I was a just one. They had played a dangerous game, and now they would pay the price. The first domino had fallen, and the others would soon follow. While the wheels of my plan were set in motion, I made a conscious effort to alter my behavior towards Isabella. I became more attentive, more affectionate. I showered her with compliments, with gifts, with gestures of love that were once commonplace but had become infrequent in the years we had been together. It was a calculated performance, a carefully crafted facade designed to lull her into a false sense of security. And it worked. Isabella responded to my renewed attention with a mixture of surprise and delight. She seemed to blossom under my affection, her laughter returning, her eyes regaining their sparkle. She mistook my calculated gestures for genuine remorse, for a rekindled passion. She believed that I was oblivious to her transgressions, that I was still the naive, trusting husband she had so easily manipulated. She had no idea that I was watching her every move, that I was documenting her every lie, that I was planning her downfall with the same meticulous care that a general plans a military campaign. I encouraged her social gatherings, her outings with friends. I even suggested a weekend getaway, a romantic escape to a secluded cabin in the mountains, a place where we had spent many happy weekends in the early years of our marriage. She was thrilled, her eyes shining with anticipation. She saw it as an opportunity to rekindle our romance, to escape the pressures of our busy lives. I saw it as the perfect setting for the next stage of my plan. The cabin was isolated, remote, a place where I could confront her without fear of interruption, where I could reveal the full extent of my knowledge, where I could strip away her carefully constructed facade and expose the truth. The date was set, the arrangements made. Isabella was oblivious to the darkness that awaited her, the storm that was brewing on the horizon. She was caught in the web of my deception, a fly lured into the spider's parlor, unaware of the fate that awaited her. My focus shifted to another player in this twisted game, a man who had been a fixture in our lives for years. James, a close friend, a confidant, a man I had once considered a brother. He was charming, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. He was also, as I discovered, a master manipulator, a man who used his charm to conceal his ambition and his greed. His affair with Isabella was not simply a matter of lust. It was a calculated move, a way to gain access to my resources, my connections, my influence. He saw me as a stepping stone, a means to an end. And Isabella, blinded by her own desires, was his willing accomplice. My revenge against James would be more subtle, more insidious. I wouldn't resort to crude tactics or overt aggression. Instead, I would use his own weapons against him, his charm, his charisma, his reputation. I began to plant seeds of doubt, subtle hints about his business dealings, whispers of impropriety, suggestions of unethical behavior. I used my network of contacts, my influence in the business world, to spread these rumors, to amplify them, to make them impossible to ignore. The whispers grew louder, the doubts deeper, the suspicions more pronounced. James's carefully cultivated image began to crack, his reputation tarnished by the innuendo and speculation. His clients became wary, his partners hesitant, his investors nervous. The once solid foundation of his business empire began to crumble, eroded by the whispers of doubt that I had so carefully sown. He was isolated, ostracized, his once loyal allies distancing themselves from the taint of scandal. He was a pariah, a victim of his own ambition and his own deceit. I watched his downfall with a sense of detached satisfaction. It wasn't personal. It was business. He had betrayed my trust, and he had paid the price. The game was still in play, but the board was tilting in my favor. My attention turned back to Isabella. While I had been orchestrating James's downfall, I had also been subtly undermining her position within our social circle. I used the information from the dossier, carefully curated snippets of her infidelities, to paint a picture of a manipulative, deceitful woman. I revealed her secrets, her lies, her betrayals, to those who had once considered her a friend. I did it subtly, with carefully placed words, with veiled hints, with strategically timed revelations. I played on their insecurities, their jealousies, their fears. I turned them against her, one by one, until her once loyal circle of friends became a group of suspicious, wary acquaintances. The invitations to social gatherings dwindled. The phone calls became less frequent. The friendly gestures disappeared. Isabella was isolated, ostracized, her social life shrinking like a deflated balloon. She noticed the change, of course. She became withdrawn, anxious, her laughter replaced by a nervous tension. She questioned me about it, her voice laced with suspicion. I feigned ignorance, expressing concern for her well-being while subtly reinforcing the idea that she was the cause of her own isolation. I watched as her confidence eroded, her self-esteem shattered. The woman who had once been the life of the party, the center of attention, was now a shadow of her former self, a pariah in her own social circle. It was a slow, agonizing process, but it was effective. Isabella was losing her grip on the world she had so carefully cultivated, the world that had enabled her betrayals. She was becoming a prisoner of her own deceit, trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. The walls were closing in, and there was no escape. The cabin in the mountains, once a symbol of our shared happiness, now loomed as a symbol of her impending doom. I had suggested the weekend getaway as a way to rekindle our romance, a chance to escape the pressures of our lives and reconnect. Isabella had embraced the idea with enthusiasm, her eyes shining with anticipation. She saw it as a chance to salvage our marriage, to repair the damage that her infidelities had caused. She had no idea that I was leading her into a trap, that the idyllic cabin was the setting for the final act of my revenge. I had prepared the cabin meticulously. I had removed all traces of our past happiness, the photographs, the mementos, the reminders of a time when our love was genuine. I had replaced them with a stark emptiness, a chilling silence that reflected the state of our marriage. The drive to the cabin was tense, the silence punctuated by Isabella's nervous chatter. She tried to make conversation, to bridge the gap that had grown between us, but her efforts were met with my polite indifference. I answered her questions in monosyllables, my gaze fixed on the road ahead, my mind focused on the task at hand. As we approached the cabin, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. The once welcoming cabin now appeared ominous, a dark silhouette against the fiery sky. Isabella shivered, her enthusiasm waning as the reality of our isolation set in. I parked the car, the engine sputtering to a stop, the silence amplifying the tension. We stepped out into the cold, the crisp mountain air biting at our skin. Isabella's breath formed white clouds in the twilight, her eyes wide with apprehension. I took her hand, my touch sending a shiver down her spine. "Welcome home, Isabella," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for a hint of the love that had once been there. But all she saw was a cold, calculating stranger, a man she no longer recognized. The door creaked open, revealing the darkness within. Isabella hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back, to run. But it was too late. She was trapped, caught in the web of my deception. The fly lured into the spider's parlor. The cabin was frigid, the air thick with a silence that was more oppressive than any sound. I gestured for Isabella to enter, my hand lingering on the small of her back, a subtle reminder of my control. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light, her senses overwhelmed by the emptiness of the space. Gone were the warm throws, the cheerful knickknacks, the inviting scent of pine needles and wood smoke. In their place was a starkness that mirrored the desolation in my heart. I closed the door behind us, the heavy thud echoing through the cabin like a death knell. Isabella turned to me, her face pale, her eyes filled with a growing fear. "Alexander," she began, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" I said nothing. I simply walked past her, my footsteps echoing on the bare wooden floor, and lit a single lamp on the rough-hewn table. The dim light cast long, eerie shadows across the room, accentuating the emptiness, the isolation. I turned to face her, my expression unreadable, my eyes like chips of ice. "I think it's time we had a talk, Isabella," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. She took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the support of the table. "A talk? About what?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the dossier, the thick file that contained the meticulously documented evidence of her betrayals. I tossed it onto the table, the sound of the thick paper hitting the wood echoing through the silent cabin. "About this," I said, my voice hardening. Isabella's eyes widened in recognition. She stared at the dossier, her face draining of color, her breath catching in her throat. Where did you get that?" she stammered, her voice barely audible. "It doesn't matter," I said, my voice cold. "What matters is that it's all true." She shook her head, her denial weak, her excuses pathetic. "No, it's not. It's all lies. Someone's trying to frame me. Don't insult my intelligence, Isabella," I said, my voice rising in anger. "I've seen the evidence. I've heard the whispers. I've watched you." She crumpled, her carefully constructed facade shattering like a dropped vase. The tears came then, a torrent of guilt and fear. She fell to her knees, her hands clasped in supplication. "Please, Alexander," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just got lost." I looked down at her, my heart a stone in my chest. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, was now a pathetic figure, a broken shell of her former self, and I felt nothing but contempt. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resort to the theatrics of anger. Instead, I remained calm, my voice even, my gaze steady. It was far more effective than any outburst could have been. Isabella's pleas for forgiveness, her desperate attempts to justify her actions, fell on deaf ears. I had moved beyond anger, beyond hurt. I was now in the realm of cold, calculated retribution. I pulled up a chair, the scraping sound loud in the oppressive silence of the cabin, and sat opposite her. "Let's talk about consequences, Isabella," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. I began to detail the impact of her actions, the ripple effect of her betrayals. I spoke of the trust she had shattered, the friendships she had destroyed, the reputation she had tarnished. I spoke of the pain she had inflicted, not just on me, but on everyone who had been caught in the crossfire of her deceit. I spoke of James, his career in ruins, his reputation in tatters. I spoke of Mark, his life shattered, his future uncertain. I spoke of the others, the men whose lives she had touched, the families she had disrupted, the damage she had caused. With each word, Isabella's sobs grew louder, her body shaking with the force of her remorse. But her tears held no power over me. They were too late, too insincere. They were the tears of a cornered animal, not the genuine outpouring of a contrite heart. I leaned forward, my gaze piercing hers. "You see, Isabella," I said, my voice low and menacing, "actions have consequences. And your actions have had devastating consequences." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear, her face streaked with tears. "Please, Alexander," she begged, "don't do this. Don't destroy me." "Destroy you?" I echoed, a hint of mockery in my voice. "You've destroyed yourself, Isabella. You've made your bed, and now you have to lie in it." I stood up, towering over her, my shadow falling across her like a shroud. "It's time to face the music, Isabella," I said, my voice cold and hard. "It's time to pay the piper." The fear in Isabella's eyes was palpable, a tangible thing that I could almost taste. It was a fear born of realization, the dawning comprehension that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble. I laid out my plan, detailing the steps I had already taken and the ones that were yet to come. I spoke of the financial ruin that awaited her, the legal battles that would drain her resources, the social isolation that would become her new reality. I spoke of the systematic dismantling of her life, the stripping away of her comforts, her privileges, her sense of security. I would use my wealth, my influence, my connections, to ensure that she would never again enjoy the life she had taken for granted. She would be left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret and the crushing weight of her own misdeeds. Isabella listened, her body trembling, her eyes wide with horror. She tried to interrupt, to plead, to bargain, but I silenced her with a wave of my hand. "It's too late for that, Isabella," I said, my voice devoid of pity. "You had your chance to come clean, to confess, to seek forgiveness. But you chose to lie, to deceive, to betray. And now you will pay the price." I watched as the realization of her fate sank in, the color draining from her face, her eyes losing their focus. She was a broken woman, her spirit crushed, her will shattered. And in that moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction, a sense of vindication. But it was a fleeting feeling, quickly replaced by a cold emptiness. The revenge I had craved, the justice I had sought, felt hollow, unsatisfying. The destruction of Isabella's life would not bring back the trust she had shattered, the love she had betrayed. It would only leave a void in my own life, a gaping wound that would never fully heal. Isabella's pleas turned to desperate bargaining. She offered anything, everything, to escape the fate I had planned for her. She offered to leave, to disappear, to never contact me or our friends again. She offered to sign over her assets, to relinquish her claim to our shared wealth. She even offered to confess her sins publicly, to humiliate herself in the eyes of the world, if only I would spare her from complete annihilation. But her offers were hollow, her promises meaningless. I had seen through her facade, her manipulative tactics, her ability to twist words and bend truths to her advantage. I would not be swayed by her crocodile tears, her desperate attempts to salvage what remained of her shattered life. "It's not about the money, Isabella," I said, my voice cold and resolute. "It's about the betrayal. It's about the trust you shattered, the vows you broke, the life you destroyed." She sank to the floor, her body racked with sobs, her face buried in her hands. "Please, Alexander," she whimpered, "I'm begging you. Have mercy." But mercy was not in my vocabulary. Not anymore. She had shown me no mercy, and I would show her none in return. I stood over her, my shadow casting a pall over her crumpled form. "You made your choices, Isabella," I said, my voice hard and unforgiving. "And now you have to live with the consequences." I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing on the floor, her pleas echoing through the empty cabin. The fire in the hearth had died down, the room growing colder, the darkness closing in. Isabella was alone, abandoned, facing the abyss of her own creation. And I, the architect of her destruction, felt a chilling sense of detachment, a numbness that was both liberating and terrifying. Leaving Isabella to wallow in the wreckage of her own making, I returned to the city and set my plan in motion. It was a methodical, precise execution, each step calculated to inflict maximum damage. I began by severing her financial lifeline. I froze her accounts, revoked her credit cards, and liquidated her assets. I contacted her financial advisors, her lawyers, her accountants, and informed them of her transgressions, her deceit, her betrayal. They withdrew their services, leaving her with no one to turn to, no one to protect her from the financial ruin that was about to engulf her. Next, I targeted her social standing. I leaked carefully curated information to the press, fueling the gossip mill, ensuring that her reputation was tarnished beyond repair. I contacted her friends, her acquaintances, her social circle, and revealed the full extent of her infidelities, her lies, her manipulations. They turned their backs on her, ostracizing her, shunning her, leaving her isolated and alone. I even contacted her family, her parents, her siblings, and painted a picture of a deceitful, manipulative woman who had brought shame upon their name. They were horrified, disgusted, their love and support turning to anger and resentment. Isabella was stripped bare, exposed for the fraud she was. Her carefully constructed world, the world of wealth, privilege, and social status crumbled around her like a house of cards. She was left with nothing but the bitter ashes of her own destruction. And I, the architect of her downfall, watched from the sidelines, a silent observer of her demise. There was no satisfaction in it, no sense of triumph. There was only a cold, empty feeling, a void that could never be filled. My revenge wasn't confined to the tangible, to the material aspects of Isabella's life. It extended to the emotional, the psychological. I chose not to leave her, not physically. Instead, I remained in our home, a constant presence, a living reminder of her betrayal. I moved through our shared space like a ghost, my presence a chilling weight upon her shoulders. I spoke to her only when necessary, my words clipped, my tone devoid of emotion. I denied her any affection, any comfort, any semblance of the love we had once shared. I watched her wither, her spirit fading, her light dimming. She became a shadow of her former self, haunted by her past, tormented by her present. She tried to reach out to me, to bridge the chasm that had grown between us, but her efforts were met with icy indifference. I had become a stranger to her, a speck of her own creation. She was trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and luxury, but utterly alone, isolated in her own misery. I denied her any escape, any solace. I was her jailer, her tormentor, the architect of her emotional prison. And I watched, impassively, as she slowly succumbed to the despair that consumed her. It was a cruel, calculated revenge, a slow, agonizing torture. But it was the revenge I had chosen, the justice I had deemed fitting. And as I watched Isabella's light fade, I felt a part of myself dying too, a part of me that had once believed in love, in trust, in the sanctity of marriage. The final act of my revenge was perhaps the most devastating of all. It was the act of letting go, of relinquishing my hold on Isabella, of setting her adrift in the wreckage of her own making. I filed for divorce, the legal documents a formal declaration of the end of our marriage. I made no demands, no claims on her remaining assets. I simply walked away, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. She signed the papers without protest, her spirit broken, her will to fight extinguished. She understood that she had lost everything, that there was nothing left to salvage. The divorce was finalized, the legal ties severed, the shared history erased. Isabella disappeared from my life, her presence fading like a distant echo. I heard rumors of her struggles, of her descent into poverty and obscurity. But I felt no satisfaction, no sense of triumph. I had achieved my revenge, but the victory felt hollow, pyrrhic. I had become the very thing I despised, a manipulator, a destroyer. I had sacrificed my own humanity in the pursuit of justice, and the cost had been greater than I could have imagined. I was left with a profound sense of emptiness, a chilling realization that revenge, no matter how justified, ultimately consumes the avenger. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. I had lost myself in the process, and the scars of that loss would remain with me forever.